I've been working with this person at Michigan Tech for a while, and I thought, as we talked about some of the stuff, our next speaker is Lindsay Hiltunen. She's the head archivist at Michigan Tech in the Copper Country Collection, and I've done quite a bit. Lindsay's actually a recipient of the Historical Society of Michigan's Charles Follow Award for her leadership in Upper Peninsula history. She's on the executive of the Michigan Oral History Association, and it's a topic we've talked about, oral histories. And I thought, well, as it worked out, it'd be perfect for someone to give us kind of a little overview of how you do conduct an oral history. So that's why I've been able to recruit Lindsay to come all the way south to Windsor to make a presentation for us. Lindsay.
Thank you so much for welcoming me to this event. I'm very excited to be here. I appreciate the introduction. I do have a little more introductory at that, just so you can get to know me. I am a new SIR member. I've joined within the last year. This is my first time attending a meeting. But as you can see from the photo, I'm a Washington Capitals fan. I grew up, my grandpa Dave was a Red Wings fan, and my dad was a Leafs fan. So I grew up, following both teams. I was lucky enough to live in the Upper Peninsula, so we got the CBC, we got Hockey Night in Canada. I come by it very honestly, but I was always searching for a team of my own. So my husband and I, we moved to Washington, D.C. the year that Ovechkin got drafted, and I watched his star rise. So that, just living out in D.C., being able to go games, watching him come into his own, that's how my husband and I started following the Capitals. So that's me at Kettler Iceplex a few years ago. But just a little bit about me professionally. I am a university archivist at Michigan Tech. I've worked in multiple roles throughout my career. I started as a public librarian in Washington, D.C. I've worked in development and gifts coordination at George Mason University, and then I've served as an archivist at Michigan Tech since 2013. Today's actually, 2014, and today's my 3-year anniversary as the UA at Michigan Tech. I'm an oral historian as well. I started a few proactive collection development initiatives since I've been at Michigan Tech. For those familiar with the Copper Country, you know that we're known for our industrial heritage, the copper mining that took place in that region. So we were able to do an oral history called Mine Memories, where we actually spoke to former miners, their families, and those that grew up in a mining community. We've also done an oral history project called Black Voices in the Copper Country, talking about underrepresented historical narratives within that part of the state. It's believed to be a very white part of the state, which it is, but there is some minority groups and other ethnic identities that aren't always talked about, so we were able to kind of tap into that through some social historical research as well as an oral history project. I'm also currently a PhD student at Michigan Tech. My focus is on historical memory. I'm very interested in cultural history, and of course, sporting culture is one of those aspects. And I'm also a former rink rat. I learned how to skate when I was very young. I was a competitive figure skater for many years, but I come by it very honestly to love hockey, love ice sports, and just be a part of this whole community. Just a little map of where the UP is for those not too familiar. This is a nice old mining map from the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company collection.
Is that White Pines copper?
Some of it is. If you look to the far east, the little blue marks, you'll see
that's
some.
White Pine.
Yep, that's roughly white pine. Yep.
Gotcha.
So then just a little touch about the repository that I work for, the Michigan Tech Archives. I'm sure many of you will recognize the great Tony O. This is a 1964-65 press photo from Michigan Tech that's within our collections. I'm not going to read through all the subject coverage because it is quite extensive. Just to give you a sense, we have over 5,000 topical areas that we collect for within our vertical file. But I'm here at a sports conference, so just a glimpse at some of our sports and rec collections. We have the papers of John McGinnis, famous coach at Michigan Tech from 1956 to 1982.
From Toronto.
Indeed. And we also have a wonderful collection that we just acquired within the last year and a half from Connie Julian, the Copper Country Copper Country Hockey History website. If you'll recall, some of you may have been at the 2004 STIR meeting that took place in Houghton, but we've acquired a lot of materials that relate to local hockey, professional, amateur, and otherwise recreational. Probably the bulk of that collection relates to the Portage Lake Pioneers and Michigan Tech Huskies, but there's a broad spectrum of all sorts of sporting and hockey taking place within that. Just a little look-see at our reading room if you ever have occasion to come and do research at Michigan Tech. We are open from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. You can walk in or you can send me an email and I'd be happy to do some remote consulting with you. And if you want to come far north or south, depending on which direction you're coming from, we'd be very happy to welcome you to our repository. But the reason I'm here today to talk about oral history. What is oral history? I think we all have a sense that it's just getting down, sitting and talking to somebody, getting them to share their memories, share their stories. But there's a lot more to it than that. It's not just having a fireside chat or having a coffee chat. You want to go into it very methodically and with some preparation. There's preservation aspects and interpretation aspects that you can't account for on the fly. So you want to make sure that if you are going to be conducting oral histories, that you follow some of the rules and some of the regulations and try your best to create a semi-professional, if not professional, environment through which you're doing that. It's an interesting aspect of history because it's simultaneously the oldest type of historical inquiry. The oral tradition predates the written word, but it's also one of the most cutting edge and modern aspects of history as well. With the realm of digital technologies, different software, editing equipment for working with sound files. So it's simultaneously the most ancient, but also on the brink, on the cutting edge. And this is a great picture of former Michigan Tech coach Al Renfrew with his son. So oral history is meant to be shared. All the celebration and joys of success, as you can see here with John McGinnis celebrating with his team, but also the challenges. We want people to share the difficult memories, the sensitive memories, the things that are hard to talk about. But it is meant to be shared. In doing Oral History, a famous book by Donald Ritchie, he makes it clear that oral histories are meant to be shared, to be enjoyed, to be spread widely. Recordings of the interview are transcribed, summarized, or indexed, and then placed in a library or archive. We talk about this placement because we want to make sure that there's access. If you conduct an oral history and then it just lives on the hard drive in your computer, what benefit is that to the sporting culture, the history, the thread that we're trying to build? We want to make sure that we're spreading these seeds widely so that everybody can enjoy them, interpret them, and then in turn reshare them again. We want to see these when they do like the countdown of the 100 best players in the NHL, or when they talk about special memories of pond skating in your local community on the local news. You want to make sure that there's access to these oral histories. So we have these sound bites, we have these images. We want to make sure that we can share it widely. Collect oral history with purpose. You want to make sure to conduct oral history that you follow some of these steps. Preparation is key. This includes not only preparing yourself and your narrator, but also preparing your space, preparing your question set, making sure that you have good equipment, that you have the capacity to edit and transcribe what you record, and making sure that you have the capacity to either share it or find a place that it can live. Do you have a connection to a library, to a repository, to a digital archive? How are we going to make sure that it can stand the test of time, especially when technology is migrating so quickly? Are you going to be able to make sure that it can live somewhere that they can update it as certain technologies become obsolete? Participatory oral history needs two things. It needs partnerships and it needs champions. You need advocates that can talk about the importance of oral history, but you also need a strong network of partners so that you can conduct it on a large scale. The biggest challenge, but also the marker of a project's success, is the ability to build a network of partners to champion and share the effort. So that concept of sharing is a motif that comes through from beginning to end. Some of the questions that you want to ask yourself: who should play a role in oral history? Is it just for professional historians? Is it just for professional archivists? Or can you do community oral histories with maybe just some minor consultation with a professional? Who is responsible for conducting and making sure that it's successful? How do we find participants? What's an appropriate way to reach out to narrators or potential narrators? How do we encourage narrators to tell their story? We want to make sure that it's a voluntary effort. You can't force somebody to share their memories. So how do you create an atmosphere that encourages sharing of memories, that encourages sharing stories? What do we do with the recordings once we have them? Where is it going to live? Who's going to be the steward of those particular collections? Who's going to take care of the documentation, the paperwork, the copyright release, the consent forms, the photo consent forms? Who's going to make sure that there's good records management, but also file management of the actual recordings? So just some quick tips before you actually dive into the methodology. The narrator is key. Their voice is what you're there to collect. It's about them, not the interviewer, but the participant. Make sure that your narrator knows that they are the reason that this is happening. Something that's difficult when you're dealing with oral histories and sporting culture, you might have some barriers to contend with, such as injuries, physical, cognitive, or otherwise, remnants from injuries in the sport, or just things that have happened to them after they've left the rink. So make sure that their experience is key, but you make them comfortable, and you don't pressure anybody that if they're stumbling over words or if they're forgetting a name, try not to interject. Let them speak in their voice, and then you can do repair work after the fact, or you can get consent to read through and get approval of a transcript after the fact. Let them have their voice. Like I said, participation is voluntary. You want to prep the space and the equipment. Document. You want to make sure that if it is going to live somewhere, such as a repository, they're not going to be able to share that unless they have those consent forms, unless they have those copyright releases, and sometimes you even need to negotiate a deed of gift. It just depends on what repository it's going to. So you want to really insist that you have proper paperwork. This might be something for a future workshop, but Michigan Tech does have examples of that. And I know Bill had mentioned that there are some that exist in other sporting organizations. As those guidelines are being developed, I think it's beneficial to look at a lot of examples and figure out language that will work correctly for CERT. And that really just depends on what the end game is, what the hope and the intentions are. But that's certainly something that I can help to consult with as we move forward as an organization. Lastly, I'll say expect the unexpected. You never know what's going to happen. We've had some narrators that have spilled the beans on some university scandals that we had to then go back in, edit out at the donor's request or at the participant's request. They realized that they made a faux pas in the course of the interview because they were so comfortable, and then they're like, oh yes, this is going on the record. Perhaps we want to strike that from the record. So we'll be sure to navigate those things as they come up. Another thing, there was a fire alarm that went off one time. You never know what's going to happen. I was in a home conducting an interview, and the woman's dog wouldn't stop barking. So you have to make sure that you have the capacity to edit out sound, or you can get some buffers for your microphone that can help eliminate some of that background noise. Batteries can run out, so make sure that you have extras on hand. You never know what's going to happen, so be prepared and be creative. All right, so preparing for the interview. You want to move forward intentionally, so make sure that you've thought about what is the purpose of this project. You don't just want to conduct an oral history out there in the ether, just jump out into the wild and pick a person and just ask some questions. No, it should actually be a purposeful journey that you're setting out on. You want to identify potential narrators and establish contact, build a rapport. A lot of times you don't always know the person that you're going to be interviewing, so you may want to conduct some research on the teams that they played for. Think about particular individuals that they may have been close to, because that might lead to another future interview. But just navigate that very delicately, and it's okay if people say no. The voluntary piece is key. As you're creating your questions, leave yourself some wiggle room, because sometimes there will be tangents in the interview, so you want to have a multitude of questions that can help you bring it back to the official question set at hand. Create your forms, select the right equipment. Archivists these days are usually recommending mobile equipment. The Michigan Tech Archives uses a Zoom H5. It's a device about this big. It can easily fit into a briefcase or a purse. The components with it fit into a very small case. So you want something that you can take off site. You want something that can actually go into the rink with you, maybe even onto the ice as you're skating around with people. You want to make sure that it's mobile. And you also want to make sure that you're getting something that's affordable, especially in the future if there are going to be oral history kits that are developed. You want something that's sustainable. The device that we purchased, it's roughly $299 for the different mic adapters, the device itself, and then the carrying case. And they're also less expensive and much more expensive mobile models, but we've found success with that particular piece. And I can talk more about equipment in the future if you have questions. After you've worked through your equipment, you want to figure out who the interviewers are going to be, give them some basic or deep training depending on how much time you have. And then you want to try to set a master schedule. You don't want to do this on the fly. You want to make sure that you have access to a quiet, controlled space to conduct the interview. You want to make sure that everyone's availability is there, and there's also some buffer if traffic is bad or if a flight gets canceled, depending on how far you're going or how far they're traveling. Just make sure that you set a schedule and stick to it as best you can. So actually conducting the interview, you want to make sure to test your equipment. Sometimes equipment fails, technology is that way, so make sure that you do a test before you're actually doing the formal interview. Have extra equipment and accessories on hand as needed. You want to greet the narrator and make sure that they're comfortable. If they're coming to your space, greet them, smile, welcome them, just set them at ease. And as people are talking, it's nice to have water at hand. So anytime we would conduct an interview, we would make sure that we had either a pitcher of ice water or some just bottled water. It sounds like a simple fix, but it actually means a lot to the people that are participating. It shows that you care about them, that you respect them, and that you're thoughtful about the process. You want to use a good leader statement. This isn't only just to keep track of the files themselves, but it's also nice to have that consistency if it's going to be added to a formal collection. The example of a leader would be to give the name of the person that you're interviewing, give your name, give the date, give the time, give the location, and give the name of the project that it's affiliated with. You could play around with those particular metadata pieces. It's up to whoever's conducting the interview and where it's going to end up. But you want to make sure that there's some formal leader at the beginning of each recording. Let the narrator tell their story. I think I already talked about this in some capacity, but make sure that it's their voice, it's their memories. You're trying to usher and encourage those to come out. You don't want your voice to take over. They may say something that sparks a memory within you, and that's fine, but save that for after the formal recording, unless that is sort of the idea is to have a back and forth, like a ping pong type interview. But if it is just a traditional oral history, make sure that the narrator is the spotlight. Lastly, take good notes. As I mentioned, sometimes the unexpected happens, so you want to know exactly what time that happens within the interview. So Chi-Chi, the Chihuahua, started barking at 1 minute and 25 seconds into the interview. I'll take a note of that so I know exactly where I need to go in the audio file to scrub that sound out. So just try your best to take good notes. And in that case, I recommend, if it's possible, to have a partner with you. It can be difficult to be reading the questions, operating the equipment, engaging the narrator, and then also taking solid notes. In the cases that I mentioned for Mind Memories and Black Voices, we had grant funds, so we were able to hire a student assistant. So I could truly engage the narrator, and my student work the mechanics, good note-taking, working the equipment. So if possible, try to have a partner. I know it's not always possible when you're doing community histories, but you never know what's possible. All right, so post-interview, what happens? Be sure to thank the interviewer. Obviously, you'll thank them immediately after, but it's nice to send them a formal card, maybe a small token of appreciation or a formal letter, just something to truly let them know that you respected their time, you valued their time, and you're going to do your due diligence to make sure that the interview itself is recorded, stored, and shared. Make copies and designate a good master. It depends on where it's going to live that will designate what the appropriate master file should be. Different archives have different standards for what should be the master file. So if you are already working, let's say the Hall of Fame, for instance, they might have regulations. Michigan Tech, our archives will have different local practice, so just make sure that you're talking to the repository where it lives so the right files can be designated in the right way. You want to create inventories if there are multiple interviewers. Typically what we do at Michigan Tech is just have a basic spreadsheet set, durations, and any unexpected things that happen, so like a little notes category, just so you have a little cheat sheet of who you've worked with, when you worked with them, the tangibles and deliverables that came out of it. It's just a good way to keep track, because it's easy to get inundated if you're doing a lot of different interviewing in a couple-week cycle, let's say. After that, you want to transcribe and clean your audio. The software that we use at Michigan Tech is open source. It's called Audacity. That's another workshop opportunity in and of itself to show people how to use that. And I'd be happy to talk more about that. And then we just do classic transcription. We have students that listen to it and go through and transcribe word for word what's happening. And then I go back and do the quality control. There are transcription services that you can send files out to, but they come at a premium, sometimes several dollars per minute for transcription, so it adds up quickly if you're doing a lot of interviews. So it's best to work with student help or get some volunteers, or you can do it yourself if you have time. After that, you want to make sure that you're storing your copies. If you need to, the archivist would develop finding aids or other navigable tools to bring you to the collection. And then you want to make sure that all consent forms releases are filed appropriately, and that would happen at the institution where it ends up. So some future directions for our organization. To me, I hope that this talk just inspires people that it is possible for us to really have a proactive and robust oral history program. The Oral History Committee has great ideas of what we can do in the future and some things that we're looking to this summer, develop some guidelines, research grant opportunities to see if we can get some sponsored funded projects that would actually move some of these ideas along. Create lists of desired oral history topics, like are there particular games, eras, teams that we want to build oral history projects around? If so, we want to build partnerships with the right people to make sure that we can do that, and be sure to just network with each other and with external organizations. Reach out to potential narrators. Maybe there's a few people that are getting close to moving on to the next realm, whatever that might be, and we want to capture their memories so we have those to share. So are there folks that we want to talk to, or are there anniversaries or important milestones coming up? Are there things that we want to jump on soon? Are there people we should be reaching out to? And then just lastly, we want to get out there and conduct, preserve, and share these hockey-related stories. That's really what the goal of this is. I hope I planted a little seed today to get people thinking about this. I'm available to consult. I'm going to be a lifelong SIR member. I've truly enjoyed my experience here at the meet and greet in just the first half of the day so far. I love hockey to the bottom of my heart, and I hope to share that love with all of you here. And if you need to contact me, here's my information, and thank you for your time. I will say this is one of my favorite photos within the collection. That's Gordon Howe. He was offering a pin to a local youth. His name wasn't captured in the metadata for some reason, but Howe made several trips up to Michigan Tech. That's one of my favorite ones. Thank you.
Do you do anything to record the mental state? I mean, some of them are, the memories fade as you get older.
Right.
There's
Exactly.
other issues.
Yeah, and that's sort of the difficult, delicate task to navigate. And it helps if there's a family member that can help interpret as memories fading, because they know their loved one best of all, so there may be things that trigger them to go into a particular state of either misremembering or repeating stories or something like that. And then with permission on the consent form, you can write something into the transcription, maybe like a leader note that, you know, such and such experienced X injury, or such and such is experiencing X illness, and it may account for them doing certain behaviors. And it's a delicate thing. It really just, it's a case by case, but you want to make sure to have that conversation before the recording equipment starts.
We did with one hockey personality, and his wife played a very important role in getting him there and helping, well, once they got him started telling stories. and he has since passed away. But we have this copper country hockey legend, and the stories that youth have heard about for years, we've captured it. And so it's just an amazing oral history of this gentleman.
Yeah, I was at a reunion in Kirkland Lake in 2003 because we won the softball championship of Ontario and beaten all the teams down south here.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple of guys came, they used to live in Kirkland Lake in the '53. When the mines closed down or they finished school, they went down to Houghton,
Right.
worked in the copper mines.
Yep.
And of course, the company I mentioned earlier was one of them. And of course, they came up to the reunion. They all driving Porsches, and I said, "Hey, there's a lot of them." Oh, we were they were trying to impress us because
Right.
they come from poor families.
Yeah.
So we had the reunion, and
Frank, do you have a question?
Anyway, the question is, these guys would be nice to interview. They live down in Houghton. Of course, some of them passed away.
Gets carried away.
And I wish I would have done that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of missed opportunities like that, and we all have our anecdotes, but it'd be nice to get the anecdote from the source to tell their story, and that's the biggest thing, is reaching out to those people and making sure we have capacity to do that. So that's what we're trying to figure out now. But
By the way, we need a team in Oshawa, okay, real bad. Larry Hillman was pitching.
thank you. Yes.
Well, it's been related to the previous question from Ed. What if somebody tells you information you definitely know is inaccurate? And in some cases, and even preparing for the interview, you know that this person in the past has told a very important story and had the facts wrong. How do you go about that?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's difficult, again, because you don't want to necessarily interject within the interview itself if you're the formal interviewer, unless it is meant to be like a fireside chat. Then you can have that debate within the course of the interview. Just depends on the intention. But if it is a more formal oral history, let them tell their story, and then after the recording has happened, you may want to have a dialogue that, I remember it this way, or show them some primary sources that designate, like, a score was a certain thing, or a certain person didn't start that game, or something, whatever the misremembrance is. Provide evidence. If they stick to their story, let that be their story, and then really it's up to the historian to then interpret as they're listening to that. Do we put weight into this story, or am I going to dig deeper and do more critical thinking to find the facts, so to speak, or what is true? Because really, is there any truth in history? It's that noble dream of historical truth. Like, we're constantly seeking it, but are we ever going to find it? So I see what you're saying, like if there's inaccuracies, but it's a case by case how you navigate that.
Norman, you had something to add there, Norman?
Yeah, just on that question also, I think it's part of the archival process, even if the facts are wrong, I think it says something also about the person, the way that, I know it's like she was saying, I think it's important for the historian to check that and maybe we can even make a note of it. But I think the fact that sometimes people repeat these errors is also showing something. I know it may, for you as historians, maybe you're saying, oh no, it's a wrong fact, but it may show that it becomes like kind of a community type of way of thinking or on that fact, that specific fact, which is important to know.
Right. I mean, the objects of SIR, one of the objects of SIR is to spread the correct information about history.
Yeah, but then it's the job as a historian to correct that, to take that information and correct that in that sense. The other thing I wanted to make, the other point I want to make is just re-emphasize what you said about the importance of the waiver form also, especially when we had cases where we had hockey writers or historians who interviewed people, but for them the purpose of the waiver was only for giving that information to the historian. But and in those cases we need also if it's getting to an archives, and we need that waiver saying that research will also be shared with other people in that sense. So I think sometimes that creates problem also in that case, because the person that's being interviewed doesn't necessarily know that it's going to become public information or
Right.
records. That's important.
Yeah, we're actually working through that issue right now at Michigan Tech. There was a legacy collection that was bequeathed to us by someone that conducted an oral history, and they got consent forms for that person to share their story with a different organization, but it would stay within that organization. They came to Michigan Tech now, and we're scrambling, trying to reach out to next of kin or the individuals themselves to get consent forms, copyright releases, and deed of gift signed before we can make it available to the public. And I would hate to see this collection languish, but that's just what we're dealing with right now. And you would do the best that you can if you know that it's going to end up somewhere. Work with that organization from the beginning so you can get proper paperwork right at the start. You don't want to be doing that after the fact.
One more question, go ahead.
Yeah, it's suggested when you're doing an oral history to, while you're with the narrator, to see if they have any hard objects, like photographs, scrapbooks, letters, in hockey programs,
Yep.
because this would be associated with the interview,
Yes.
number one. And number two, they may have material that is not generally available to the public because it's unique to their personal history.
Right.
And that can be something that can be captured along with the interview.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, and something that we did through the course of our sponsored oral history projects. We had a half hour before we actually conducted the interview that we had things that would tease or prompt memory. So we had photographs. So in the case of, let's say we're interviewing an individual player, look at things from their playing days, bringing out old sweaters, bringing out programs, bringing out rosters and stat sheets, showing photos of their fellow teammates, things that will help enrich the interview because it's firing memories that maybe they left locked in the attic a long time ago, and it's something that sets the tone of the interview, and it can certainly come into the interview itself as well. So that's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Lindsay, a great